They told me family was a contract written in blood and silence. They taught me how to say yes to things I did not want, how to smile while doors closed behind me, how to make small sacrifices that looked like loyalty. I learned how to be agreeable because agreement kept storms away and kept the house warm. I was careful, obedient, polite, the daughter who answered at dinner, the niece who pretended to be grateful, the woman who stored longing in pockets and emptied it later while making tea. It was safer that way, and for a long time, safer felt like a kind of love, safety. I discovered how to price stop my father had always been a man who ran numbers in his head as if life were a ledger. He measured value the way some men measure acreage, by lines on a page, by property deeds, by interest rates and credit reports. In his mind, family obligations were not abstract moral duties. They were liabilities to be balanced, assets to be allocated. If a son had made bad choices, the solution was simple in his calculus: the daughter would pay. He believed the family could be kept whole by enforcing small humiliations and by reminding everyone, often, who had the money and who had the manners to accept it. My brother had been a bright beginning that fell into a long, self-inflicted slide. He had talent, charisma, charm capable of making people sign contracts and forgive deadlines. But talent turned to debt when it was misapplied, and charm became currency drained on bad bets. He borrowed against promises and friendships, invested in ideas only he believed in, and then begged the family to bridge the gap he had created. My father, who folded favors into family like currency, announced one winter evening that the family would, in his words, do what had to be done. He declared the daughter's duty. I would fix my brother's mess. No one asked me if I could. No one asked if I wanted to. They simply assumed I would rise because that was what daughters in my family did. So when my father told me I would be covering the debts, there was a heap of breathless expectation around his chair, an audience primed for my compliance. I remember the way the lamplight cut the room and made him look younger, the way his voice was calm and certain, as if this were an arrangement already created and stamped. He measured me as one measures a mortgage, calculating what I could afford without considering what I might need to survive. I could have shrugged and signed the dotted line of obligation. I could have written checks until my account dwindled, taken out loans, been quiet as my savings evaporated. I could have told myself this was the cost of being part of something bigger than myself. Instead, a small, fierce thing tightened in my chest at that moment, and I tasted an unfamiliar word: refusal. Not the performative refusal that would be softened with apology and soon washed away, but a refusal like setting a boundary carved into stone. I told him, without theatrics and without drama, that if I was to pay my brother's debts, I would not be paying them with nothing. I told him that responsibility should be mutual, and that if the family expected me to shoulder ruins born from other people's decisions, then assets acquired on the back of my labor and my name would also transfer where they belonged. I said I would take the house and the car. The words landed in the room like a pebble thrown into a still pond and watched the ripples move outward. There was a kind of silence that followed, the kind that presages a storm. Faces that smiled politely for decades tightened. The appetite for easy puppetry was offended. My mother set down her cup. My brother, who had been looking at his phone, flashed momentary panic and then the practiced recalibration of a man who thinks himself essential. My father, who had always spoken in ledgers, found his ledger complicated by a woman who kept her receipts. Up until that moment, I had been the one to keep my head down and tend the visible life, maintain the garden, keep the house running, make sure every holiday had a table and every guest left saying what a good home we had. Outside those walls, I worked a job on which I had built a small, quiet financial life. No one noticed the overtime hours, the freelance clients I took in the dark hours, because I was tired of being fragile. I saved because the world seemed unpredictable, and because the idea of being able to walk away felt like armor. My savings, my mortgage remission plan, the title paperwork, I had considered those private scaffolds, not weapons. I had never intended them to be used in a battle against my family. Yet a weapon is just a tool. Who wields it determines its meaning. After I said I would take the house and the car, negotiations began in the language they knew. There were confessions of regret from my brother that felt poised with self-pity rather than accountability. There were appeals to tradition, to sacrifice, to me being the one who had always understood family better. They offered me angelic smiles and evasions and the usual script of gentle coercion. My father spoke of duty and honor. as if the only honorable thing left was to accept the draining of my resources into someone else's failures. He argued like a man who had always been right and expected the world to bend around his certainty, but I had spent years learning the technical truth behind certainty. Structures fail when they are built on the sand of assumptions. My father assumed obedience because obedience had been his currency. He had never learned to imagine the possibility that the person in front of him might refuse to be erased. I made them an offer that smelled of quiet strategy. If they insisted I cover the debts, they would sign over the deed to the house and the title to the car to my name. If they refused, I would walk away and let them face the consequences of their decisions, including bankruptcy, foreclosure, public exposure of the financial entanglements that had been buried under polite dinners. There was no melodrama in my voice. It was simply the arithmetic of protection. I would not fund their negligence for the price of my future. What followed was a furious attempt to shame me back into compliance. There were frantic calls at odd hours and thinly veiled threats about being ostracized from family events, about being hard and ungrateful. There were quiet insinuations to mutual friends about my character that played like recorded static under the conversations. My sister-in-law sent a message asking if I had lost my mind and reminding me of how the family had always supported one another. My father sent legal letters implying my social obligations were less fungible than property deeds. The theater of leverage progressed in drawn-out acts. I listened to them and recorded everything they said. I kept notes, banked emails, saved text messages, and legal paperwork. I did not want to weaponize their words. I wanted to protect myself. When the papers came, the ones that threatened my reputation and tried to buy my financial autonomy, I sat with each one and read it as though reading a map to a trap. Defense is the smallest form of vengeance. It keeps the enemy at a distance and the mind sharp, because I had learned to be strategic. I had not been born strategic. I had become so through necessity. I had a career quietly assembled, a line of work where clients paid me for clarity, for the ability to see patterns others missed. I had bought the relationship between labor and security, not optional pleasures, but slow accretion of capital for a time when the world would ask things of me. When the family expected me to step into a debt that would last a decade, I turned my financial tools into a shield. The moment of reckoning was not cinematic in the way movies portray hyphenated confrontations. There was no raised fist, no tearing of garments. Instead, there was a legal meeting in a lawyer's office where all the soft calls were muted by the hard clacking of signatures. I walked in carrying myself like someone who had decided to be the author of their own line items. I spoke with the steady voice of someone who knew how to keep books balanced and how to translate emotional blackmail into human terms. In that room, I made them an alternative. They could accept my terms and avoid public bankruptcy and prolonged shame. Or they could refuse and I would let market consequences follow their refusal. They chose to sign. It was an ugly private surrender recorded by lawyers and stapled into files. The house deed transferred, the car titles signed across the paper, names inked and witnessed. My brother cried. His tears were a blend of relief and humiliation. My father's face was an opaque mask. For a while, nothing else happened. The house smelled the same. The rooms remained with their inherited warm exhaustion. Yet the air shifted. Ownership, once a soft myth, had become a material fact. People will tell you this is revenge. They will say I got what I wanted, that I took advantage. If that is what they call it, fine. I prefer a different word. I call it choice. I call it survival. When the family had taught me that my value could be assumed into non-existence, I reclaimed my worth in the way the world most understands value, by formalizing it after the signatures dried and the keys changed hands. The family ritualized its grief in different ways. Some enforced distance, pretending a line had been crossed that could not be repaired. Some tried with muted calls and tentative messages to rebuild bridges. My brother, sober for a year, began to construct an honest ledger of his own. He did not ask for the house back. He did not ask for the car. He paid appointments, met with debt counselors, took jobs that were steady rather than flashy. He learned lessons that harsh arithmetic teaches with a blunt instrument. And me. I kept the house because I wanted the roof and the warmth it gave my mother when she came to visit. I kept the car because it meant being able to take my life forward without hitch. I did not buy extravagant things with the money salvaged from others' mistakes. I paid down bills that should have been mine anyway. I built a reserve for the holidays and invested in my work and in a small trust for the day when my daughter, if I ever had one, might need entry into a life not predicated on obligation. There was a kind of quiet justice in the choice. It was not punitive so much as corrective. It set a new precedent for the family. If loyalty meant leveling ruins into the backs of women who trusted, then loyalty had become a system to abuse. I refused that logic. I refused to be the family's invisible balance sheet. People sometimes ask if I ever forgave my father. Forgiveness is a private calculus that does not require theatrical absolution. I forgave him the way I would forgive a man who had been born to patterns he had never investigated. Not because he deserved it, but because the weight of grudges can be heavier than the loss itself. We built a cavity of distance that allowed us to breathe. He called sometimes, admitted mistakes in the way older men do, haltingly and with the vocabulary of past habits. I listened. I guarded my life. Those who brand my actions as petty forget that survival and revenge can overlap. They forget that the same hands that scrub dishes and fold laundry might also hold deeds and legal forms. They forget that agency looks different from anger. I took the house and the car not to burn them, but to end the pattern that expected me to burn. I made a calculation that ensured my future would not be an unpaid bill in the mornings when light finds the living room, and the house breathes quietly with the hum of life. I sometimes think of my father's ledger and the moment he told me I would pay. The memory is sharp and it still tastes like iron, but it now sits beside joys I bought myself, a quiet kitchen where I can make tea without apologizing, a safe route to work, a future with choices that belong to me. The work of reclaiming was not a single dramatic hour, but a long, steady accumulation of things no one may have expected, minutes kept for myself, money saved in the night. A readiness to say no. If anyone asks what I would tell other daughters who sit in rooms where family demands are made like taxes, I would say this: learn your numbers, keep your records. Cultivate the small economies of freedom. Love will ask of you always. But love is not debt. And if you are asked to carry someone else's ruin as the price for family acceptance, you may choose to carry instead the keys that open a door away from being owed and into being owner of your life.